Hello, all. This is David Swank of the D-Swank channel. Time no see for people who haven't seen me with a webcam in several years. Hi. Joining me is...
some ugly joker from down south, Fuzzy Gamer here. How y'all doing?
And I'm running with a new webcam that is giving me fits, if you can't tell already just from how choppy my video is. So if that thing dies, I'm sorry, but I'm trying my best right now. I may have to get another one, unfortunately. So, yes, welcome back to our podcast, the Not Magrathea podcast. I think we're just going to run with that because I haven't seen any better suggestions.
Might as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of our descriptions are going to be like, well, they're not Europeans. They're close, but they're not. I have a feeling at some point, at least for me, it is.
Yeah.
So, yes. This week we're going to be talking about the physical world. And before we go too much further, there was a concept that was brought to my attention in between the 2 weeks that we'll probably touch a little bit on. Actually, Fuzz brought it to my attention. Do you want to talk about it? The soft and hard world building.
Yes. I've long forgotten the video and the person who brought it out, but I brought the attention to David about soft and hard world building as akin to soft and hard magic systems. And I believe it was you that immediately came back with that sort of dichotomy can shorthand or limit you in your world building. So how is that?
Well, my thoughts on that is well, first, let's talk about the difference between soft and hard. Hard world building is in the way it was described, and I'm looking through our chat history to get the name of the guy. I think it's One World at a Time. Hello, Future Me. And he's comparing hard world building, like Tolkien-esque, to soft world building, like a lot of Miyazaki films. And a lot of that is in presentation. And world building, the two that he uses when describing, Hello Future Me uses when describing this is Harry Potter and Spirited Away. And that the world conforms around the narrative that is being told for the character. Now, because of that, you can't really do soft world building as much in, like, building a world for D&D. Would you agree?
I'd say so.
However, on a narrative level, because I'm writing, there are aspects of it, but to me, it is, as Megamind would say, all in presentation. You can have a hard world building in what you're putting together and present it in a soft world building aspect. And that is, I guess, we're discussing world building as on the creative aspect of constructing it, whereas I feel Hello Future Me was discussing it as how the story is presented to the audience. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I might have bypassed a concept in there because it makes sense to me, and my explanation transition might not always work the way I'd like. But yeah. But anyway, that was something we felt that kind of needed to be touched on at the beginning or the very end of the podcast, and we're close enough that we could probably tie this back into, like, pre-build considerations. So,
yeah.
wanted to do that, wanted to tie some stuff into the previous episode, and that felt natural. So, do you have anything else to add on that concept?
Not so much.
Okay. Do you think I did justice in explaining the difference between soft and hard world building?
I think so.
Okay. So, the primary point of this episode that we're discussing today is going to be talking about the physical world of this environment, what your world is going to have in it. Some of these might not even matter. Some of these are more important than others. Such as the first one, which is a location in a solar system. Does it really matter for Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, Harry Potter? Well, Harry Potter because it's on Earth, but yeah. For the most part, it doesn't really matter unless it ties into your setting. I have a setting that I'm working on that it's important to. And kind of serendipitously, Fuzz has a setting that he was developing simultaneously that has a very similar setup. And would you like to talk about that?
Certainly. In the current D&D session that I am running, my world is actually a moon of a gas giant. A gas giant that is fairly far away from its binary star system, which means it has very, very long years and seasons that are tied to, months, almost up to years at a time. And you also, due to this, you have a cycle of day and night that can last years, or a year, up to a year. So it could have a huge impact on your world.
So, for those not to give you a better mindset of what this is, Yavin from Star Wars Episode 4, New Hope. It's a moon. I almost said forest moon, but that's Endor. Well, it is the forest moon of Endor, which orbits another. Anyway, there's a lot of moons in Star Wars that orbit gas giants that have people living on them, things like that. So, kind of give you something you can grab for a mental image. So yeah, with my world orbiting a gas giant, the gas giant actually plays into the mythology of the world, the pantheons and things like that. They refer to it as it's their equivalent to Olympus. So the god's throne room sort of thing. That's a separate world. Both of these are separate worlds from what we are actually building for this podcast. I should make that clear.
Yes.
So, location in the solar system can have a big impact. There's even been some science about Game of Thrones and how that planet, whatever the world is called, how it orbits its star to create the long winter. That people have sat down and used computers and mathed all this out, which impresses me. And if you have a well-developed world, people will try and figure this out, even if you never intended it. So, these are just things that to consider as well. So, we've talked about where it is in the solar system. Also, things like how many moons. If you want to have it mostly like an Earth-like setting, but throw 2 moons into it, that immediately makes people think, this is not Earth. They did that in Beast Wars. The first season of Beast Wars, an old animated CGI cartoon. I don't remember why they got rid of the second moon, but it had story consequences, and then, we're on Earth. But, do you remember, Fuzz? I know you're the big Transformer.
Yeah, vaguely. I want to think, wasn't one of them the aliens that were watching over them that used Unicron's vision to basically strike fear into their minds and whatnot? Wasn't it like a satellite, like an artificial satellite?
Yeah, because whenever they dealt with that, that's when the metallic beasts came about.
Yeah,
I don't remember what they called that form, but yeah.
Transmetals.
Transmet. Okay, yeah, that sounds right. But yeah, so celestial bodies, what can they see? Because all of that can kind of tie into mythology and things like that, which is something we're going to be touching on next episode, is the mythologies. Next up, we're talking about land masses. And I actually have been given a couple of images by Fuzz for what we're going to be talking about with land masses. Specifically with... let's... You want to start with Yorth?
Sure.
Okay. Why don't you give us a brief rundown of why you chose to set up Yorth like this? What was your primary...
Honestly, with Yorth and that whole campaign that we're playing in, that y'all are playing in, I had never drawn a map before. So with Yorth, I literally grabbed a pencil and paper and just started scribbling, and just let come out what came out. I wasn't worried about anything because this was a fantasy world.
Okay.
And I just let my hand do the work. And as it shaped itself, I began to tinker with some of its shapes to make sure some of it matched up so it looked a little more natural.
Okay. So, would you say that... Because, I mean, there's clearly all the small islands. Is the fact that did you have the idea for what Yorth looked like before, or after you had decided this was going to be a nautical campaign?
Before.
You had this figured out beforehand. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you decided it'd be a nautical campaign just because it would fit the world better, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. When I started scribbling all the little islands and having fun with it, I realized, there's no way we're not going to be sailing this.
Okay. So, the world that I have, and I'm going to get a picture because I built a globe. I got 2 half circles of styrofoam, glued them together, and then drew and painted my world on it. And I'll take a picture of this, or several of them, and have this up here for mine. But, again, there's another similarity in here. We both have an impact crater on our world. Which I find hilarious. But where I got mine was I started out because I had hex paper. I just started using the best RNG hex random generator I could get at the time, which was Civ 5, and I just I spent like 3 days RNGing Civ 5 and playing with the settings, things like that, and waiting till it loaded up something that I thought was fascinating. And I was like, ooh, that looks kind of cool. And once I got probably 30 or 40 different land masses figured out from there, I started tweaking them. So I mean, you've got the hex grid on Civ, so you've got your mountains and your deserts and things like that clearly divided, which kind of helped, and I based it loosely off of that, unless I was like, having a river here instead of there would look better, things like that. So that's where I got my start for putting it together. And I wish I should have thought about this beforehand and sent Fuzz some pictures of my globe so he could talk about it too. This is kind of unfair because I'm seeing all his stuff and he's not going to see any of mine.
That's all right. I know you, Shaw, man. Don't worry about it.
Well, I guess we could pause for a second and I could take a couple pictures and throw it with my phone and throw it into Discord so you could talk about it.
All right.
All right. I'll do that. Okay. Well, that only took about, 5-6 minutes?
Give or take a little. And in that time, I went ahead and got me some earbuds, so I ain't got to worry about these giant headphones. I'll be doing this next time.
Yeah. That'll be nice.
Oh, yeah. So let's take a look here. Which way is it intended to sit? The first one?
Okay. If you can see that metal sprog sticking out of the bottom, that is the South Pole.
Yep. Okay. All right. And the giant white blotch is the North Pole?
Yep.
Okay.
That green blotch that's on the fourth image, that's a continent that you can see just to the north of the first image. On the first image, it's kind of over the horizon there.
Yeah, okay.
And then the last two are a continent that is in the northern hemisphere. I wanted to mix it up with that one because I was thinking people are usually very northern hemisphere centric. So I was thinking if I set it in a southern hemisphere, it might be... It's different because people think you head north, it gets colder. In this setting, where the majority of the story takes place, at least in the first little bit, it's all in the southern hemisphere. So you head south,
right.
And it gets colder. So
I have to ask, is your crater impact the yellow hole to the right or that big long dent that looks like an asteroid might have streaked across the horizon there?
The dent occurred in movement, in transport. The dent occurred in transport. It's that circular crater in yellow.
Yeah.
And the colorations on this are all countries.
Right. So a political map, basically.
Yeah, it's a political map.
All right. Definitely like little islands going on right there before you enter that large sea on the fourth image.
Fourth image. 1, 2.
I think that's the fourth image. Yeah.
No, the fourth one is the green continent. So, that'd be the fifth. I sent 6 images.
It is the fifth. Yeah, so that'd be the fifth image.
But yeah, I like that. And all of this has like story, why things are like the way they are on the planet. So I kind of enjoyed throwing that together. And some of it was just spur of the moment. Some of it was I liked the way it looked.
Yeah.
Honestly, the crater was influenced by the crater in Kerbal Space Program. But I had to come up with something other than, Kerbal showed up to cause the crater. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do love creating maps and land masses. And the big thing, now that we've kind of discussed them and shown them off, islands are kind of handy because you can have one political entity control an entire island, or most of an entire island. Right. And you see that in real world, like Cuba. Then you have places like, I think New Zealand is a split island. I'm not sure who they share it with. And I know Haiti is a split island. But I'm not sure what's on the other side, who owns the other side of that. I'm displaying my ignorance of the world outside the U.S. at the moment.
Wouldn't that be the Dominican Republic next to Haiti?
Yeah, you're right. I'm pretty sure you're right, at least.
Yeah.
But
I mean, times do change. This is going on 20-year-old world geography knowledge.
Yeah. But, again, islands kind of form natural... they're easy to defend. It's very easy for a single nation state to claim an island and push their influence over it because, well, they're easy to defend, they're hard to attack, and if you've got enough power to conquer the entire island, it's hard to justify going after the next one for the same reason that it's hard to invade your own. So, you've got that, and if you're having a political situation, having rivers and mountains dividing countries, that's kind of the way it naturally occurred. However, if you want to look at the Middle East, that's all the British fault. Most artificial, how do I want to say it? Most old or ancient national borders are derived due to geography. National borders that are straight and based on, say, longitude or latitude lines, those typically come due to conflict or colonial powers declaring this is how it's divided up. So that, I know we're talking about land masses primarily, but land masses affect things of that nature. So.
Or potentially the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah. Next up, let's skip our third point and put that at the end. Seasons and weather. You'd brought this up before with
okay, so everybody's getting a lovely view.
What is
you knew this was coming.
Is your cat mooning your camera?
Yes.
Ah, God.
You knew this was coming. I warned you.
I know.
Anyway, seasons and weather.
Yeah. I mean, on my world, it's similar to Earth. Um, it's the seasons are a little, instead of having the angle of the axis, the tilt of the axis that the Earth has, which gives it our seasons. What influences the seasons on my world is its place in orbit around the gas giant.
Right.
And its seasons are longer and different than ours, than Earth in some aspects, because winter is closer to winter in Alaska, where it's like twilight for a long period of time or night for a long period of time. So
right.
Except I might be getting that backwards, and night may be when Alaska's leaning away. Whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I can't really draw a contrast with Yorth because it's practically identical in that regard. But an interesting, and let me pull up my world I'm building for podcast specifically. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah. While I haven't really thought about seasons much for the world that we're building for the podcast, I had thought up of some ideas where I think I already told you that it was going to be a world broken up, that the world itself is cracked open.
Yes.
And the core of this world is made up of the source of magic, raw magic.
Okay.
So I had the idea, what if this raw magic pulsates very slowly up and down so that the oceans and rivers in between that's made up of this raw magic actually comes and go like a tide.
Ooh.
So a high tide, it would be this raw magic actually coming back up and over the lower lying land masses, which could cause some serious issues amongst those who still live on the land.
Yeah. And you could use that for developing things, like weird things on the world. Depending on what system you use, there's some fun little templates, spell formed or something like that for creatures that have a huge amount of magic, or how magic affects them. Right. That's kind of nifty.
But being a world that has a relatively normal orbit around a blue giant, I think is what I decided on. So it'd have to be further away, being a hotter sun. It would have relatively normal seasons-ish.
Okay.
But imagine some of them being kind of harsh, because being further away, you would have a much longer orbit.
All right. So that kind of ties into, and I'm saving my my world that I'm working on until after we've covered the primary points here.
Yeah.
Just so people out there aren't worried that I'm forgetting or something. So I know some fiction that I have read, specifically, and I'm probably going to be referencing SCP a fair amount, but there's one of the SCPs is about the world of fantasy. And in the world of fantasy, there is a storm that these golems basically follow throughout the world. And the storm kind of has a path that it follows every 20 years. Which I think is kind of a cool thing to do. If you have a magical world, that first D&D uh, game that you were in, that I was the DM on,
Mm-hmm.
the country that you started out on, the reason why it hadn't really explored out into the ocean was there was the maelstrom that stopped ships from going out into the ocean there. I think World of Warcraft has something like that in the middle of their world.
Yeah.
So weather can be a big impact, and it can be if your world has magic in it, or if you have magic by another name, weather control technology, like G.I. Joe had. Yeah, you can have all sorts of funness with the with weather and seasons and things like that. I mean, what's the most well-known thing from Game of Thrones? Winter is coming.
Mm-hmm. The long winter. Or the long night, maybe? Long winter? No, long night's fine. Anyway.
Yeah. But seasons are important. They can play important narratively. But consistency helps. And that, putting those things together, there's some fun stuff you can do with that. And, I'm kind of torn whether we want to bring up Godzilla vs. Kong in any of this.
I imagine that's going to be still in spoiler territory for a lot of people.
Okay. Because, there's a lot of stuff that would tie to the physical world. But you know what? We could sit down after we go through our world building process, for lack of a better setup or phrasing or whatever, and then we could sit down and just talk about world building in media afterwards. Hey, we've hit on a way to continue this after we're done with this part.
There you go.
So next up, and this is a fun one to tie into since we just talked about Godzilla versus Kong. What's special? Is there anything special about, like, the plants or the animals? And my camera just locked up. So I'm going to stop that and get it going again. Yay, I'm recording again. I got my face back. Yay, I'm sure y'all are all happy about that.
I'm sure.
But anyway, I'm sorry, but I keep falling back to your D&D world, the world of Yorth, on this.
Yep.
Just because you have some great things in here that are unique. And not even like unique to D&D, like the giant ooze that we fought on the ship. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking like the four primordials.
Right.
And their impact on the world and things like that. Those are fantastic. And would you like to talk a little bit more about those? How you develop them? Things like that?
Yeah. The development process of the primordials, I think I was calling them like Titans to start with. Initially, I was planning on them to be part of the only pantheon that existed. But then I realized I didn't really want gods to have that huge of an impact on my world, which, next episode. So I made them an actual physical living thing on my world. And I thought to myself, these things are huge. They're going to change the way this world works when they walk. You know? And as far as what they are and where they came from and ideas, some of that came from y'all. Like the idea of Gwei being a giant cicada. That's all you.
Yeah.
That is all you.
And my camera froze again. Just keep going.
Yeah. And honestly, throughout the development of the campaign so far, they've changed a fair amount to be more consistent with the world that's being created around them now.
Okay.
So your flora and fauna doesn't have to be written in stone as soon as you think of them either.
And
really, none of your ideas do.
And this is back to the hard versus soft argument we brought up earlier. And the thing is, you have to be careful with your soft world building. And because you just if you're not careful with the soft world building, you put yourself into a corner.
Yep.
And if you want to see a series that was, in essence, soft world building done poorly, you can look at pretty much anybody's narrative episodic Let's Plays of Space Engineers. If they weren't intending for it to be a narrative from the beginning, and it kind of evolves into one, that's soft world building. And a lot of those fell apart, story-wise.
Starting to feel attacked here, man. Won't lie.
Hey, I was thinking about Sage and Aaron. Their whole thing with the drones.
Yeah.
But
anyway.
Yeah, flora, fauna, the best one I can point out for flora and fauna are going to be a lot of the fantasy, cave trolls, orcs, wargs, Tarrasques.
Yeah.
Oh man, I just have an itch in my throat.
Yeah, no kidding.
Don't want to go away.
Right, and these things, depending on how influential they are. Let's take your big things like Tarrasques, like Godzilla, like Gwei and Talu from my world. These things would be so big that there's no way they're not going to influence the way your world looks, the way its people act, even the way the flora itself changes to adapt to these monstrous things trampling on them.
Yep.
Or if you have some aberrant creature that has this magical effect on everything that goes around, you're going to see where it's been. It's going to change your world. And you have to consider those type of things when you're creating the critters and the plants of your world.
Yep. Or, mushrooms. Mushrooms in Skyrim. They glow.
Yep.
I always wanted to go over... the game never really let you, but I wanted to go over and grab a mushroom and use it as a torch.
Yeah.
I always wanted to and wondered why the game wouldn't let me.
Speaking of flora and fauna, do you know what truly influenced my need for a long night and the bioluminescent plants that happen in my world?
No.
Arc Aberration. I love that map so much.
Yeah, that's a good place if you're looking for weird stuff. Aberration is a good place, and they did a great job because of its position in creating because it's an ark, it's a space station that holds an environment, and by this point we've already found out that, you're in space, and the element is potentially toxic. And then you get to see in Aberration all of the bad stuff, that this wonder material, how it affects things. And really, tech is just just mana. Mana. I had to readjust and get my finger quotes in frame. But yeah, tech is just mana.
Yeah.
So, and the last one, and this is important for no matter what world you're building. Is there more than one sentient species? A lot of fantasy, you have elves and dwarves and halflings and gnomes and goblins, and you don't have to know how they developed. You don't even have to decide if they're going to be related to each other in some way. Some make sense to be related to each other. Some you can just say, according to the myth, this is how they were created, like what Tolkien did. That the elves were created first, and I think it was Durin, which was the god that created the dwarves, created them, presented them to the high god. The high god said, "Oh, you made a mistake, get rid of them." And he raises up his hammer to strike them down, and the dwarves cower in fear. And at that point, the high god realized they're alive, and we can't destroy them. So that's why they're stuck underground, is the surface world wasn't ready for them, in essence. So, you can have the species created in that manner. You could have something, if you want to go more on the evolutionist side. And in science fiction, one of the ones that stands out in my mind as a place where multiple species evolved, the Centauri from Babylon 5. Because there's one episode where they're, I can't remember the name of the species, but Malari asked Garibaldi, what did the last one say as he died? And it's...
And your mic said nope.
My mic said nope. Okay. Well, at least, hopefully, since I'm recording it on my end, that came through. But yeah, multiple sentient species are... you can play around with that. I do caution a lot because using other species as how do I want to phrase that? Social commentary can backfire.
Oh yeah.
Significantly. So be careful when do it if you decide to do that. What was the movie with the orcs at modern times?
Yeah. Blight? No, something Blight. I think it's something Blight.
Yeah.
I'd have to go look it up and find out.
It came across to me as very heavy-handed, and the world did not feel right, considering the story behind them.
And the sad thing is, it's a great setup too.
Yeah.
And that actually, I say that it's actually a note I'd like to bring up on use of multiple sentient sapient species, and they don't have to all be sapient. uh, when I was initially creating Yorth, my planet, I had one of the players who's not with us now basically give me some flack about my species being separated by landmasses. And it confused me. I mean, yeah, I realized that a lot of other systems and worlds, they're all mingling together, and that's all fine and dandy because, it's a thing. But it kind of confused me because I look at us as a species, and we're all one species, and we're divided by land masses and fairly large differences in appearance.
Yeah. Yeah, the physical attributes of different regions.
Yeah. I mean, in a fantasy world where you have multiple sapient species, generally speaking, you're going to have the whole birds of a feather bit happening.
Right. I can see that. I see that as a fair argument.
Yeah.
So, and the last element in there was something that I read in a book, a creative writing book. And I believe the book was written by Stephen King, but at this point, my mind's kind of not... I'm not 100% that it is Stephen King. But
don't mind the bottle throw.
Yeah. The phrase is no pink trees. And why no pink trees is a thing is how would you describe your pink trees to the reader? Why would you point out that it was a pink tree? And I love his well, I say he, I'm pretty sure it's Stephen King, but I love the thing for it because we have sakura trees, which are pink when they're fully in bloom. And so we have pink trees in the real world, but what he is saying is that if you have something random, something that is not important to the story, like, well, I mean, take Dracula, something like that. A story that, classic, they're cruising through, hunting down Dracula, and suddenly, in the middle of Europe, in the Carpathian Mountains, there's a valley full of pink trees. Why? Why even bring that up? It doesn't support the narrative. If you bring it up and the pink trees are important for the narrative, such as Dracula had a trading route with the Far East. Okay. That you could, and that was important to the story. That's one way that you can use world building to remind people or inform people of it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not important to the base story. So be careful what you bring up that is just weird or random unless it has a purpose for the story. And did that make sense, Fuzz?
It makes a lot of sense. That actually comes up quite a bit from a DM's perspective. In any situation, when you're trying to describe a area, if you over-describe the situation and give a lot of details about things that don't support anything that you're trying to actually project onto your reader or your player, they're going to focus on things that have absolutely nothing to do with what you're trying to show them.
I've heard people just say that there's a homeless man. What does he look like? And suddenly, by just giving him a little bit more description, the party is heavily interested in this homeless man that was just there as window dressing.
Mm-hmm.
And that it can derail a campaign.
Yeah.
Or derail the story, because suddenly the party is invested in the homeless man or the cat or whatever.
And this can happen to you as a writer or a DM too.
Yeah.
I am notorious for starting to fret over small details that have absolutely no importance to what I'm trying to write. But if I put it down, I'm going to start asking, well, why is this here? And I will justify it, and then why is that there? And I start justifying it, and before I know it, I'm nowhere near where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And it can get very daunting, and that can drag you so far off course in writing, no matter what you're writing. It may pull you completely off your project.
Right. So, I think what he was trying to say by saying no pink trees is don't throw the pink trees in just for pink trees. Throw them in if they have a purpose.
Right.
So, throw in the Technicolor zebra if he has purpose. A patron god of bubblegum. Do you not remember the bubblegum? The fruity?
I know.
Okay, thank
yes.
you. Thank you.
Yes. Lasted like 2 seconds, and you spat it out and got another piece.
I just kept sticking pieces in. Just this big mouth wad of gum that you could barely chew anymore.
Yeah. So I think we've pretty well covered most aspects, so why don't you give us a little peek into the world you've been building?
Okay. Well, before we do that, we need to... we've kind of talked about how important the physical aspects are to your world, because, like we said with the pink trees,
right?
Why bring it up if it's not important? But, how much of, in a larger scale story, land masses, solar system, all of this is important, but if it's just flash fiction or a short story or a one-shot D&D thing, a lot of this is not important.
Right.
So, yeah. Now, my world. My world, for a quick refresher, the idea that I was going with was a semi techno magic world, influenced by the 100 Years' War between France and England. So, the world that I'm putting together is continent-based. And I kind of like the idea of having one of the two parties involved in this being on an island. Partially because by doing this, I can have stories, or a story, or a side story, or something like that, which is influenced by, like, the Battle of Britain, which is from World War II, or the some different naval battles and naval situations. By doing that, it expands the aspects that I can touch with the story. And I'm not 100% sure on the species aspect of the story. What I'm thinking is narrowing it down to you have human and you have fae. In the same sort of sense that you had human and fae in Ancient Magus' Bride. Can you still hear me, Fuzz?
Yes.
Okay. But I was kind of thinking of including the Fae in there just as a group that they're powerful and they kind of don't care about the war. They live in like the mountains or the rivers, or so they're kind of land spirits, if you will, and that they don't care about the war, but the people fighting them have to use magic, have to negotiate with them. Fighting the war have to negotiate with them to use magic and pilot their mecha Gundam, magic Gundams, Magitech Gundams. Yeah. So my consideration is, I don't care about where the planet is in the solar system. They're in the golden belt. The majority of the land masses I don't care about. It's just this continent. And it's really just a region in the continent. Pink trees. I'm not 100% sure on what I might have that could be considered a pink tree other than the technology, but the technology is, or the Magitech is important to the story. Seasons and weather, it's probably just because I'm going with the European influence on this story, kind of retelling something that's already going on. Gonna stick with European-esque weather systems, and for each region. And at the moment, I'm thinking any sort of fancy plants. Well, I'm having to do some research right now. And this is kind of ties into our next episode, but plants had different uses in mythology, and so did animals and things like that. So that's going to be tied in there. And any sort of mythic plants or animals might show up, but they're all going to be from the Fae realm. And I'm not touching the Fae realm other than acknowledging it exists, because I don't want to build the Fae realm. Because my idea for the Fae is that they don't make sense. The story's never going, at least I don't plan on it ever going to the Fae realms. It's just a place that exists. It's where the Fae live, and they come to visit the mortal world. So, how's that?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. You've kind of talked about yours, but would you like to recap and expand?
Yeah, sure. And I'll go ahead and touch on the very last point, the importance of the physical aspect of my world. With mine being a potential D&D setting, or any roleplay setting, and it focusing on effectively people being tossed out of the lap of luxury into the wilds of the land, it's going to matter a lot. Because you would have people that never really seen much outside of their city walls because their city is floating. being tossed in on their heads, dealing with weather that is uncontrolled, creatures and plants that have never been seen before, the effects of the flowing rivers of magic, raw magic, and other species that never made it into the floating cities. So it would matter a lot. I will have to actually build on the physical aspect of my world, probably more than a lot of the other points that we're going to be covering throughout this podcast. The location of the solar system, shape of the land masses, none of that really matters outside of just having a pretty map. Pink trees, probably my blue sun. Has no other real, effect other than making the nights pretty. Weather and seasons, other than possibly being harsher, they're pretty normal, except for maybe the raw magic tides.
Yeah.
I think where the importance of the land masses comes in just is the fact that it's a broken world. It's land masses that have broken along their continental shelf lines and are floating on this massive ocean of raw magic beneath it, its core.
Okay. So it's I know quite a bit about geology. It's a big hobby of mine, is that, but you basically have two types of rocks. You have what the continents are made out of, and then what the tectonic plates are made out of. And it sounds like your tectonic plates, something happened, and now they're gone, and you just have magic. This
the egg
ball,
hatched.
This ball of power in there, and for some reason, the plate, the basalt that made the plate disappeared, and the granite that is lighter weight and what the continents are made out of is now floating over the magic orb.
Right. And speaking of that, that would also mean that all the greater oceans are gone too.
Okay.
And the only water left would be inner land masses and aquifers that aren't being funneled out into the, the magic rivers, as it were.
Ooh. So is water going to be a conflict for your world? The source searching for water?
I believe it would be. I mean, a lot of let's take Earth here, for instance. A lot of our fresh water, I don't think ever even meets the ocean, so I don't think it'd be a huge problem. But at the same time, who's to say that my oceans were ever salt water to start with?
Fair enough. As long as they are not potassium oceans, because that would be explosive.
That would be fun. Maybe that's what happened.
Somebody dumped a buttload of potassium into the water.
Yeah. But yeah, as let's see here, special about the flora and fauna, I pretty well covered that already. It would be pretty much your general D&D setting critters, a lot of them being altered by the raw magic, including plants. So that would be fun to play with, and a pretty heavy focus on what you would be witness to in the world below the floating cities. As far as the sentient species, I feel like your standard mix is what's going to be there, and at the time I was hunting for something to call the land masses and locations and the hierarchy between those in the clouds below and so forth. So I kind of went with the Norse idea of the world tree. So
Okay.
Yggdrasil is what I named my world after. It's just a bastardization. So in my world, one of the big differences in species is that the dwarves, they generally don't. Well, actually, no, dwarves are generally underground anyway. They're going to be heavily influenced by that Norse mythology. So species will be your typical run-of-the-mill, elves, dwarves, dark elves, your demons, your orcs, your humans, stuff like that. So there's going to be quite a few species, and probably a handful of other ones if I need them. Like what's going to be at the lowest level of the what was it called? I can't even pronounce it. I just wrote these down. I can't even pronounce half the words. Muspelheim, the realm of fire, as it were. Where you meet the. Is it Muspelheim? Muspel. Muspelheim. Muspelheim. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're placeholder names until I find something better. So I mean, those creatures, those people would not even be known of or seen because they can't come to the surface. And I'm not even sure where this would fit, but I have made the decision that exposure to raw magic will have a similar effect to the depth in Made in Abyss.
Interesting.
So the longer you're exposed to it, the deeper you go, the less likely you're coming back up. So there's a lot of species that may only be myth and legend. Next episode.
And because we're talking about this stuff, he's talking about D&D. I'm going to go ahead and bring up something for the D&D aspect. In 3.5, there was a template that you could put on creatures. And this might be useful for you, Fuzz, for your world. Yep. Called Spell Warped Creature. Okay?
I'll look that up right now.
I have it. I actually linked it to you in the Discord. But what it does is it changes the creature's type to aberration. You don't have to recreate hit dice or saves or any of that stuff. Size is unchanged. Everything stays the same. Your natural armor increases by 2. It gains special qualities of spell resistance of 11 plus its hit die. It can absorb spells. So, basically, if somebody casts a spell on it, all right, and it's a critter with 3 hit dice, so its spell resistance is 14. So they roll to see if they beat its spell resistance. They fail. The creature then absorbs that spell. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And it absorbs, and when it absorbs the spell, it can do whatever it wants with that spell. It can turn it into a +4 strength enhancement for a minute, a dex enhancement for a minute, or a con enhancement for a minute. It can gain temporary hit points equal to 5 times the level of the failed spell. It can increase its base speed by a number of feet equal to 5 times the spell's level. Or it gains 10 resistance to one of the given energy types. It also gets some flat bonuses to strength, dex, con, and int. It's if it has 3 hit die or less, it's same challenge rating as the base creature. 4 to 10, challenge rating goes up by 1. 11 or more as base creature +2. It's usually an evil creature, and if you want to have it on like a character, it's a +3 level adjustment.
Okay.
So, that kind of fits with your world.
Yeah.
You have creatures that basically have this template on them running around.
Mm-hmm.
And they're used to mana, so they've got a resistance to it, and their body's used to dealing with it and absorbing it. So if somebody throws a spell at them, they can absorb the spell.
Right.
And frankly, it'd be fairly easy to modify this setup to work on a narrative level for a story.
Right.
So, I mean, if you gave this to, say, a Tarrasque, you could have a fairly effective Godzilla-like analog, just because, I mean, you throw a spell at it and you make it stronger if it doesn't reflect it back at you.
Mm-hmm.
So, next, well, before we wrap this up, do we have anything else to add? I can't think of anything unless you have a question for me. I don't have any questions for you unless you have something to add.
Not a whole lot. I think we did we get any questions on the last one?
No, I just checked.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess if we wanted to, we could look at the co-op world, but I think we've actually got every bit of an hour on this one this week.
Yep. I mean, I don't remember much about the co-op world. Was it written in our outline?
It's written on my world. I put it there.
Okay.
It was a city-scaled scope world. It was a hidden world. It's not so hidden. It's a city that had two phases to it.
Yeah. I remember that. Honestly, landmass doesn't really matter. Solar system doesn't really matter. Weather doesn't really matter unless you had magical.
Unless there were, yeah, all I was going to say is unless you had a specific season or weather pattern that would affect the amount of open portals or the thinness of the veil in between the worlds.
I like that. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, having certain days or like solstices or whatever, the stars align and thing. Yeah, yeah. Flora and fauna and sapient species. Well, we've already said there'd be more than one sentient species.
Yep.
And flora and fauna is kind of the crux of the narrative with that, because you're trading stuff from one world that can't go to the other normally.
Right. And as far as importance goes, it wouldn't be hugely important outside of the last two aspects.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's... I don't think that's going to be a big issue. I mean, creating the fictional animals and stuff like that, that's either you grab something from the DM, the monster manual for that, if you're D&D, or, I mean, honestly, there's very little reason why you can't just grab something from a monster manual and call it something different, change it up a little bit if you're writing something. So,
right. Generally speaking, you won't even need any of this for storytelling unless it's specific to the in that particular plot that you're telling.
Right. So, with that, I think we're done. If you enjoyed this, go ahead, like, subscribe, share it around. Share it around. That's more important than liking and subscribing. Liking is probably even more important than subscribing.
Yep.
So just let us know what you thought. Leave a comment. And I guess we'll be seeing you next time, where we're going to be talking about myths. So until then, bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.